Hello everyone and welcome to another episode of Quantum Conversations, Empowering Communities and Elevating Leadership. In this episode we sit down with someone whose work has had a meaningful impact on how we think about committee effectiveness, governance and community leadership. As someone who's been in the industry a long time, I've seen firsthand the difference a high-functioning committee can make, not just in how property is managed, but in the kind of community it becomes. That's why I'm especially looking forward to our guest today. I'm joined by Nic Abbey, a widely respected leader and practitioner in the strata and community sectors, and someone whose work I've long admired. Nic has recently developed a practical guide for 21 good practices for stronger, more effective owners' corporations. It's a clear and thoughtful resource that breaks down what effective strata leadership and governance really look like, and more importantly, how to build them in practice. The guide's centred around 4 key areas: direction, incorporating strategic thinking, planning, goal setting, impact and budget alignment. Section 2 is governance, good processes, compliance, fiduciary duty, rules, roles, reviews and continuity. The 4th area is engagement, participation, inclusion, transparency, trust and connection. And the last area is capacity, technology, memory, handover, innovation and governance infrastructure. So we'll need to unpack this across at least 2 episodes, I think. Nic, welcome along. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Michael. I'm very happy to be here.
An amazing guide that you've pulled together that we'll work to unpack during our session.
And lots of big words already.
Indeed.
But we'll do our best to make it very clear and practical.
So whether you're an experienced committee member or just starting out, there'll be some great takeaways that we'll work through this session with Nic, and we'll make a reference to the full paper and full guide that you'll be able to access afterwards. We won't be able to go into all of the detail. We'll touch on the majority of the areas, but to go into more detail, you'll be able to access the guide afterwards. So Nic, before we start, I want to ask you if you can tell us about where your passion comes from and what drives you around the strata sector. It doesn't happen with a lot of people. We drag people onto the committee. It's hard to get people who are passionate about their community and their owners' corporation. So what's driven you to really thrive in the strata sector and the passion around education and leadership?
I have to say, Michael, that so many people, whether they're managers or committee members, lot owners, are passionate about their communities. And I share that passion. I've been involved in owners' corporations now for at least 17 years. And I've found along the way that every committee has been focused, full of passionate people who want to make a contribution. And I just thrive in that environment. I just love working with people. I love working with people to achieve things together. And owners' corporations can achieve significant outcomes in the best interest of all lot owners.
Yeah. What drove you to pull this guide together?
I'm obsessed with benchmarks and good practices. I just want to know, through learning from owners' corporations, what are the good practices. When you join a committee, if your manager introduces you to other owners' corporations, which is a good thing, you may learn from other OCs. But if that doesn't happen, it's a silo, it's an island. And there's no way of learning from other OCs as to what are they doing well around governance, around leadership, around compliance issues, around how a community is engaged and how people work together to achieve good outcomes. So long ago, I made it my business to find out through organisations like Consumer Affairs, from other management firms, from Strata Community Association, as to what are the good practices? What do we need to know to make our committee and our owners' corporation far more effective?
So this is a guide. Perhaps it's going to all those committees who might be in isolation in that silo, not knowing other owners' corporations and the skills and education they have, to be able to package it up and help them get started and get a great foundation framework around what's required and what's best practice.
Absolutely. And look, having said that, every committee is creative and every situation is different. So That's not to suggest that good things aren't happening within a particular OC, obviously, but it does help to know that there may be like-minded people out there, or people who share your passion, and people who are developing good practices themselves. Maybe they're doing some things better.
Yeah.
And let's learn from that.
Yeah, indeed. So we'll get started. The first area is direction. Many committees jump straight into fixing problems. What do you think strategic direction, and why is it often so overlooked for committees?
In an owners corporation, there's always a tension to be managed between the here and now and what you may want to achieve over 12 months and over a longer time frame. And so the urgent, it's a cliche, I know, managerial cliche, but the urgent drives out the important. There are many things to react to respond to. They have to be managed. However, the most effective OCs, they strike a balance between what needs to be done now and what you may want to work towards as a community, not simply as a committee, but as a community over 6 months, 12 months, possibly 2 years or more.
Yeah. So let's explore what it looks like when a committee manages the urgent, but also starts thinking and working more strategically. And the first good practice, number one, is to focus on clear outcomes and impact, not just what we do, but what changes. So what can you tell us about that first?
I'm always impressed with a committee. If you ask, the average committee member in an OC, what do you want to achieve over the next 12 months, or possibly over the next 2 years, you should be able to say that very quickly.
Yeah.
There should be clarity around outcomes, and not just the things we're doing, the activities, but what are the outcomes? Like, what actually makes this community or this owners corporation better because of the committee's work, not because we've actually ticked off so many actions in the course of the year. They're important, but what are the actual outcomes that matter?
Yeah. What led you to prioritise this, and how can committees ensure that they are measuring the true impact of their efforts on the community, in the community?
I think in any organisation or any community setting, there's always the problem of process creep. The process creeps in. Are we doing things right? Are we focused on the key actions and activities that matter? But what really matters, of course, is how we are working together to achieve outcomes. And so in our own good practice guide, we make the point that good committees manage tasks. Great committees deliver real benefits for residents, and for the shared property. And we always want to know what are the 2, 3, 4, possibly 5 outcomes that the committee wants to achieve in the course of the year. And that might be common property enhancement, stronger community connections, reduced maintenance costs, better participation. And then what does that success look like? How do we know we're working well and achieving things? So when it comes to the AGM, hopefully the chairperson and the manager can tell a story of our impact, not just our activities.
Yeah.
That really matters. There's also one other thing that I'd like to emphasise, Michael. Owners corporations, by the legislation, obviously have a focus on common property. But many owners corporations are working on other things. I mean, in my owners corporation, for example, we've always funded community events. Well, that's not even mentioned in legislation, the word community. But we've always put aside a budget each year to do that. So a committee needs to be clear as to whether they should or shouldn't take action if the issue falls outside their legal authority or conflicts with their own rules. For example, a committee might also share information and facilitate connections. And that might be passing on safety advice or promoting solar rebates or liaising with council, with local government as to what might be of use to the owners corporation. Or it may work directly on things as per its own rules, and that includes repairs and budgeting and safety audits and so on. So this is an interesting situation in many owners corporations now where they've got this dual focus. They have their core business around common property, but they may also have some responsibility for other issues. And those common community issues that may not be strictly OC matters, they can still be areas where an OC adds value. Obviously, sustainability initiatives, cost savings via bulk purchasing of water, electricity or gas. I mean, there are discounts that owners corporations can generate if they get their act together. Fire or flood risk management. It's an issue for many OCs, certainly my OC. Community events. So there are various issues that an owners corporation can work on, obviously, that may not be part of their remit strictly defined. And you have to look at that very carefully. And sometimes for a large OC, that requires legal advice as well. Like, how far can you push the boundaries without the risk of actually working in areas which aren't really to do with the core business of the OC?
Yeah. So I might just touch on, you talked about the strategic and a work plan and a calendar as well. Why do you think an owners corporation should have an annual plan? You know, a lot of them just think they're an owners corporation. You know, why do we need a plan? So just focusing in on that annual plan.
And when we say an annual plan, you know, we don't mean an academic document. We mean a very practical tool that an OC is actually, it might just be a 1 or 2 page work plan and calendar, must be shared, of course, with lot owners. You know, this, like, a committee's not a secret society. This is not just committee business. This is something that should be shared with all lot owners. And what we like to see in a work plan, obviously, you know, it's a way of mapping out the work for the year. Obviously, the committee meetings include the dates and locations. Let residents know so they can suggest agenda items in advance. Scheduled reviews of key governance items, you know, like the maintenance plan, safety audits, insurance policy, community engagement and participation opportunities for lot owners, community events, planned maintenance activities. If there's a maintenance activity in the owners corporation, we'll alert residents. Sometimes they have suggestions that something needs to be done, you know, which the committee or the contractor aren't aware of. And so, you know, such a document should be kept visible. It should be circulated to all lot owners and renters. And so for a small OC, you know, keep the calendar obviously short and simple. For larger OCs, it could be a much more detailed maintenance schedule, which is part of the calendar and the work plan for the year. Yeah. So it's a way of being not so reactive, much more proactive, planning the work. It leads to greater efficiency as well.
And how does that work with, you know, we talk about strategic plan as well. Is it a case of strategic plan is 2 or 3 year document, again, sort of just high level, and the annual plan is just that 12 months? It's sort of they form part of the same document? Would that be
Indeed.
right?
And ideally there's a strategic plan, and of course we'll come to that topic a bit later on. But ideally they're all nested in each other, that there is a strategic plan and then the work plan comes out of that.
Yeah. Good practice 3 is use outcome-orientated meeting agendas, not just admin lists. Did you want to talk to that a bit further?
With committee meetings, one of the things that we've always been focused on, Michael, how do we ensure that we're adding value and we're not talking about management issues, which is really the work of the manager, or admin issues. So some of the committees that I've been associated with, they have reorganised their meetings around the owners corporation's shared goals and priorities, maintenance and improvement, the external appearance of lots, community and stakeholders, cost savings and services, the safe use of common property. So you're starting to focus much more on outcome areas and how the committee adds value, not because we are confined to administrative work.
And that brings us through, by the sound of it, though, what will likely end up being the key categories of a strategic plan. It's bringing those key
Absolutely.
areas into the
So you're
agenda.
organising around the goals and the strategic plan.
Yeah.
And that's such a simple change. Like, I'll be quite frank about this. Sometimes committee meeting agendas are almost like a legacy of the 1950s. You know, they can be quite dull, quite pedestrian. There's nothing wrong with that. You know, I'm not putting that down. But ideally, we reorganise the committee's work through the agenda on the goals, what we hope to achieve together. Yeah. And it just means that everything we do, every decision we make is clearly linked to, strongly linked to an outcome area.
Even with well-organised agendas, follow-through is crucial for sustained progress. You emphasise the importance of tracking decisions and actions, and that's the next practice. Track decisions and actions and ensure follow-up. How can committees ensure they consistently follow up on action items, and what tools or methods have you found most effective for maintaining momentum?
This is a really important area, obviously, and it's another simple thing to do. So besides the minutes, we always love to see an action list, so we don't lose sight of, you know, what's already been decided upon and how we're tracking of those. And obviously, you know, with an action item, a responsible person, a due date, the status of it, you know, Has it been started? It's in progress? Has it been completed? And how this is reviewed at each meeting. So that's really important, obviously, that a committee and the manager know exactly where they stand. And if a decision was made at a committee meeting 6 months ago, we haven't lost sight of it.
It helps the committee hold the manager accountable as well, and each other. If it's really clear in a document, we obviously do that as well. We have an action list, and like you say, who's responsible for it, the due date, and it's very clear and transparent. Both parties know the expectations of each other. So when it comes to the next meeting, you're accountable for that item, and it's very clear who's responsible when it's due by. So
absolutely. So we always say decisions are only as good as the follow through. And that's not just putting the onus on the manager. That may be a shared responsibility, but we're not. It's the cumulative effect of decisions and making sure that we are aware of what we decided many months ago and how it's been followed through, which also informs current decision making, obviously.
Yes. Aligning financial resources with these goals is essential to turning plans into tangible results, and that's practice 5, which is aligning the budget with strategic goals and priorities, not just admin categories. And I guess a question to start that might be, how can committees balance financial constraints with the need to invest in long-term community improvements, and how do you involve residents in the process to ensure transparency?
This is one of my pet obsessions, I must say, because sometimes budgets are prepared in the months prior to an AGM, but it's not always clear as to how lot owners have been involved in the process. So community-based budgeting is really important. And a budget, of course, is not just a list of costs. It's a reflection of an OC's priorities, values and vision. Budgets can always risk being reactive. What did we spend last year? And we'd sort of roll it over. Instead of strategic, what do we want to achieve together? And we have some principles of practice here. One is there should be no expenditure without a goal. Every budget item should be linked to some sort of shared goal or priority. Secondly, and this is a big change in some OCs, fees should be seen as pooled value. That we see OC fees as a shared investment in community outcomes. This is a pooled resource. And quite rightly, many lot owners will see fees as something, it's an imposition, like I'm living in this community, I like this community, this owners corporation, but what's the purpose of the fees? Is that just paying the manager or whatever? It's a pooled resource. And that's something that's really important. So a strategic budget also helps lot owners see the value in what they're funding. We're funding this together, and this is actually adding value to our community. So in terms of that sort of community budgeting approach, we'd like to see line items that are clearly linked to OC goals. Obviously, it's important even for smaller OCs that there's a 3-year forecast, that it's not only an annual budget. And of course, in larger OCs, that's taken for granted because there'll be a significant maintenance plan expenditure. Another thing that's also important with this is the manager value and cost. Now, in any challenging economic times, it's probably the last thing that OCs want to hear about, that they want to pay more for the manager. But it's a conversation that should be had with the manager, and I will touch upon this a bit later as well, as to how are we really using the manager's professional input, their knowledge, their time, their tools, and is that properly priced and valued? Or is the assumption that this is largely an admin role? And if that is, well, maybe you don't even need a manager. But if it's a professional partnership and the owner's corporation manager is adding value, as I said, is that properly priced and valued? Are we using their full capability?
Just on the budgeting process, and just narrowing in on that a little bit further, what's the best way for a committee, in your view, to work with the manager? Because the manager is a critical component to that discussion. So how should the committee look together to work with their manager in that budgeting process?
Every manager I've worked with has the expertise to prepare a smart budget, and that's where it starts. But it also means there's a conversation with the committee and with lot owners through the committee as to, this is our draft budget, not as an afterthought, prior to an AGM, but this is a process that's, even in a smaller OC, it's really important to have that conversation. But the manager should be sufficiently aware of the goals and priorities? So that gets back to, are the budget items linked to goals, or is this actually creating an admin budget? And that's okay. And for some smaller OCs, that may be sufficient. But we want to know exactly, and that's with management guidance, how every dollar is being spent on something which contributes to an outcome or a goal.
Yeah. And I think for most committees, they're probably going to, if they have, which is a great mindset to have, as you know, we both have a passion around strategic planning for owners corporations. The committee might have to really drive that, because in our experience, the majority of managers aren't like us. They don't have a focus on strategic planning. They'll just churn out the administrative budget. So the committee might have to really guide and focus their managers to incorporate that approach.
But it's a partnership, obviously, Michael,
Indeed,
and they learn from each other. Look, the other thing about budgets, which is often not seen, it can be a silo approach. We're thinking inwards. The external funding and partnerships, like there are local government grants, bulk buying programs. OCs can also think in terms of not only what they generate through levies, but there may be external sources of funding for particular projects. So a good budget looks at that. And then, of course, there's a whole thing about the long-term maintenance and compliance, and, a well-functioning owners corporation doesn't just budget year to year, obviously, it plans ahead for major repairs and so on.
Yes.
So getting the balance right, and that's, the more heads around the table, the manager, committee members and lot owners who contribute to the budget, the better the budget will be, the more strategic it will be, and the more focused on achieving things together it will be.
Practice 6 is develop a strategic plan anchored in shared goals. So what's the value of a strategic plan built around shared goals, and how can OCs develop one that generally reflects the aspirations of their community? I know when we've worked together previously, of course, and we have developed, through our learnings together, a strategic process that we use today. And from our perspective, at a high level, that involves pulling an online survey together, distributing to the whole community, asking them why they buy into the community, what they value about their community, what they like to see in their community, how they like to connect with other owners, bring in all that information. And then we have a strategic planning working group often that the committee appoints, and they pull all that data together. They go through that data, and we might have some workshops as well, bring groups of residents together to break down all that data together. And again, this committee working group will go through that, drafts an annual plan, goes up to the committee level. They tweak that with the manager's support along the way, and they finalise that they present at the annual general meeting to talk about the plan that they've got and get owners on board to adopt that at the AGM. And for us, I think the main value in doing that is it gives committees some guidance in their decision making. Do you know what I mean? As we know, committees often rotate through, and a committee can zigzag there along the way and sort of bounce from decision to decision without sort of not having a longer term view. And that strategic plan, they're aware it's built with some intention. It's got all the views of the whole community. There's been a process involved, and that sits there over the committee, if you like, to provide a framework of all the information, guidance and feedback that they can then make those decisions within. Whether committee members are rotating off or on, there's still that document that sits over there to provide them guidance moving forward. That's this sort of approach that we take in the value
Michael,
that we
that's
see.
Music to my ears. And that should be a minimal standard for all OCs. And look, it might be called an action plan in a smaller OC, it might be called a strategic plan. Let's not be too fussed with the words.
Yeah.
But when we first developed strategic plans, and that was in partnership with Quantum, it just changed everything. And some of the examples include where working with local government, it meant that we were now a respected partner and we could link in with their own planning and budgetary cycles. And in the case of one owners corporation, there were hundreds of thousands of dollars of local government investment in areas like traffic management and road safety that were in part generated because we had a strategic plan and we could have those high-level conversations with local government. But that requires a very strong partnership between a manager, which understands that, and a committee that wants to focus more strategically, that knows how to deal with the here and now and all of those immediate issues. And that's the real world of an owners corporation.
Yeah.
But at the same time, knowing that sometimes there are root cause matters or there are outcomes that can be created simply because we actually have shared goals. Yeah. Shared goals, that's what it all amounts to. So some of the key things, as you've outlined there, look, a good plan answers a simple but powerful question. What are we trying to achieve here and how will we get there? The community input and shared goals, you've mentioned a survey. I couldn't agree more. Community surveys are one of the great tools in an owners corporation. It might also be a conversation at an AGM or a special forum. We identify 3 or 5 goals that the community broadly supports, like maintain and improve shared spaces or support community events or around maintenance. Define what's achievable in the course of the year. As we've already mentioned also, who is leading or supporting each goal? Is there someone who's actually involved with this particular goal? Maybe a committee member, maybe the manager, or it may be a lot owner, a non-committee
a working
member.
group as well.
Absolutely, yeah. But often there's an individual. Okay. I agree with working groups, absolutely. Like teams and working groups, things go better at teams around all of those goals. But often there's a key individual who's going to play a leadership role in making things happen and in bringing other people together. So it's not just their own pet project, obviously. Yes. And then I've mentioned also the alignment with council and external opportunities. Never underestimate that. Once you have a plan, you've actually got, it's like your glorified greeting card. You've actually got something to engage with other stakeholders. And with surveys, we like surveys that are fairly broadly developed. There may be a focus on property maintenance, safety, accessibility, sustainability, bulk purchasing, community issues, broader livability issues like traffic, noise, fire or flood risks. Have a survey that actually is built around what is likely to be the issues and the interests of lot owners, not what the committee or the manager might think those issues might be. So it's good to have a survey that's broadly based. And then, of course, once that data comes in, we can narrow it down as to what is realistic, what's tangible, what's consistent with or isn't consistent with the owners corporation's own core business, and therefore what may or may not be in the strategic plan. But we always call our strategic plans a community strategic plan. So it's something which the committee can be respectful of and engage with and maybe focus its work around, but we don't necessarily conflate the two, that the strategic plan is simply the committee's or the manager's document. It's a community plan.
Indeed. And some interesting outcome we had after our survey is that the key focus for the community was the traffic in the area and telephone reception. Obviously, both of those are outside the remit of the owners corporation, but it flagged to the committee and there was some tension there. It's like, oh, we're just here to manage a common property. We can't do anything about that. I said, well, we reached out to the community. This is what their key focus and desire is of being part of this community. The traffic's terrible and the phone reception's bad. So you don't have to, you're not going to use a budget for that, but it doesn't mean you can't have a working group from maybe some of those key residents. They might engage with the telco providers, or might engage with local authorities to start to give information and try and push for some outcomes in those spaces and to report back to the committee. So they're not spending money on it, not spending their time necessarily as a committee, but they've got a working group because that's identified as a key issue that the working group can research and try and get some outcomes.
I totally agree, Michael. It's so important that, and sometimes, look, the committee's role or the chairperson's role is simply to be a facilitator. There may be a meeting of residents who are interested in this particular issue. It could be crime prevention, traffic management, road safety, sustainability, bulk purchasing, cost savings, for the community using its power as a community to get discounts for water or gas or electricity, as we mentioned before. And this may not be OC business as such, but the OC may have a role in publicising it, promoting it, or making sure that someone from local government or some other organisation is there to brief or inform residents, and what the opportunities may be. In the case of traffic management and road safety, and I mentioned that, that led to hundreds of thousands of dollars being spent on improving that in our particular owners corporation, our community. Well, it didn't have a direct bearing on common property, But our role was to facilitate. We couldn't have a policy on it to say one way or the other. It wasn't our expertise, wasn't consistent necessarily even with our own rules, though we have our own bespoke rules in that particular owners corporation. But we made sure that we actually played a role to support our community.
The OC is the conduit. It's got all the members' details. It can rapidly communicate with them all.
Absolutely.
And bring information together for the authorities or council, whoever you're dealing with. That's a key role of the OC, isn't it? That conduit and communication.
Absolutely. And to make sure that our community was being consulted, so that, we would have conversations with council and just, like when there were car parking restrictions being discussed, well, they can be very controversial topics in any owners corporation, obviously. We couldn't have a view in that. We would be failing to perform our fiduciary duty as a committee or a chairperson or as a manager. Yeah. But what we could do is to make sure that residents were being properly consulted and that if need be, they would vote on it, or that there would be some process to generate consensus around the issue. That's all.
Yeah. A good segue to the next focus of governance. Fiduciary duty is central to good governance. I don't think we can't argue with that. And the next practice underneath governance is to understand and apply your fiduciary duty and handle conflicts of interest well. So how can committees build and maintain trust through transparent management of conflicts of interest, have that awareness of their fiduciary duty, especially when perceptions of bias might arise? It's a chunky topic, I know.
It is, isn't it, Michael?
And how do we break that down?
This big word, fiduciary, and it's lovely to always have a Latin word in terms of trust and the obligation to act in good faith and in the best interest of others. I have to say that with fiduciary duty and with what's in the Act, and that's section 117 about committee members must act honestly and in good faith, exercise due care and diligence, act in the OC's best interest, not misuse their position. And it's like a rhetorical flourish, like we say these things and we read these things, but what does it really mean in practice? And I have to say that in the United States, for example, with homeowners associations, they probably do a deeper dive into fiduciary duty than we may be accustomed to in Australia. We're probably getting better at it, but even the word fiduciary, it just sort of seems to be gobbledygook or, it's technical jargon, but what does it really mean in practice? And those elements of the Act, they're deceptively simple. To act honestly in good faith, well, most people think, well, I'm honest. Yeah, but to act in good faith, what does that really mean with a particular issue? To exercise due care and diligence, well, due care may be being careful. Diligence may be thoroughness. There are lots of nuances here to unpack. Acting in the OC's best interests, that just seems so obvious. But when you look at practical issues and challenges that committees and managers have to face, it's not necessarily so obvious. So we try to break it down in terms of the question of loyalty, the duty of loyalty. Are we really committed to all lot owners? And how do we know that with a particular issue? The care and diligence part, as I said, care means caution. Diligence may mean thoroughness. And you don't always need to be thorough, but sometimes you do. And sometimes we don't see the importance of due diligence. We just say, look, we're being careful, we're being cautious, we're being prudent, but they may not be sufficient with some issues. The other one, of course, is about fairness, being impartial and being seen to be impartial. And we'll say a bit more about that in a moment with conflicts of interest. And then the final one, it's not language that's used so commonly in Australia, but it is, in some other countries. We would use the word responsibility, but the legal word is obedience, which sounds quite odd. But are you actually complying with your own rules? And that might sound restrictive, but sometimes in the experiences of owners corporations, if you look at the rules, including the model rules or having your own rules, often there are more opportunities than people appreciate. There's often a broader agenda just in those rules that the OC could be working around. So it means that every committee member and the manager need to be intimately familiar with their own rules. And that's partly restrictive, but it's partly also maybe a set of opportunities that you haven't explored previously.
That's a good point. Yeah. So trust is clearly critical, but once it's established, there are tools to keep it in check. Now, I know you mentioned in your guide the pub test and the self-test as practical tools for managing conflicts of interest. Both practical tools for managing, both are tools for managing conflict of interest. Can you tell us a bit more about those and that approach?
So managing conflicts of interests, wow, this is such a big topic, isn't it? Like we could spend
Another whole conversation.
That's right, I think so. And it's a core part of fiduciary duty. And as Nicole Johnson points out in her research, most people are in denial about conflicts of interest. So well, it's almost like it's an insult. But how dare you suggest I've got a conflict of interest? Our challenge is to normalise it. That conflicts of interest are every day, and it's not something to be ashamed of that you have a conflict of interest. It's not necessarily problematic. It's just making sure there's a proper process for handling it. And also we make a distinction here too between conflicts of interest and conflicts of duty. Conflicts of interest where a personal, a financial, a relational interest, maybe there's enmity or friendship that gets in the way and affects your judgment as a committee member, that may influence your ability to act in the owner's corporation's best interests. There also are conflicts of duty, of course, and that's something different. You may have two hats. You may be a member of two owners' corporations. I've always been a member of two owners' corporations. And in the main, there's an alignment there. But there may be conflicts at times, and that may need to be acknowledged. That, am I serving the interests of the bigger owners' corporation or my smaller owners' corporation? And so that may need to be acknowledged. So first of all, in terms of mature conflict management, not pretending conflicts don't exist, just managing them, having good processes for it, normalising disclosure and recusal, where you step aside, as responsible professional actions. They're not signs of weakness or guilt or something problematic. Understanding, and I think this is one of the most important things, that perception matters. If something seems unfair or hidden, it can do as much damage, and in our experience, sometimes more than the actual conflict. That's the reality, and there's nothing worse than undermining the role of the committee if people think in the community, and quite rightly, that the OC is working in an underhand way or has, placed a little line item in the budget which no one may see, or, just don't do these things. The other thing just to emphasise, besides, what matters is not just actual influence, but how it might be perceived. There are financial interests, obviously, but they're not the only conflicts of interest, a pecuniary problem as such. There are relational interests, a close personal or professional connection, friend, neighbour, family member, or it might be a rival. I mean, these things may need to be seen as conflicts. Belief-based interests. You may have strong views about sustainability or pets or short stays or whatever. That may mean you're conflicted. It may affect your judgment in working collectively with fellow committee members and the community. And then I've mentioned dual roles, where you're wearing two hats. That might be another organisation, a service provider. And in the main, these things often align and they complement each other, but there may be a conflict. So just very quickly, the pub test, ask yourself, if I explain this decision and my role in it to, some people at the pub, would they say, yeah, that sounds fair? Or would eyebrows be raised? And if the answer is no, or if you're not sure, it's probably time to declare and disclose it, at least commence a process. And the self-test, look, we have a 20 element self-test, and we're not going to discuss that right now, but basically what we're saying there is, could I or someone close to me personally benefit from this decision? Do I have a personal or relational stake in the outcome? And would I be comfortable if this situation was made public? Or was on the front page of the Herald Sun, or just think in terms of the perception as much as the actual conflict. And when in doubt, just call it out. So just normalise conflicts of interest and conflicts of duty.
And maybe what's your view on how does that actually play out? You're sitting around a committee table at a committee meeting where we're looking at 3 landscape quotes. You flag that, my neighbour's actually, I know really well, he's put one of these quotes forward for landscaping. What are the next steps to that? You flag, so my neighbour's put one of these quotes in, I'm conflicted. is the process simply that I'm happy to step out of the meeting during these conversations and the decision making, and I'll come back in the room afterwards? Or is it reasonable for you to be involved in that conversation around the landscaping works and the various quotes, and you step out at the decision making time? How does it look on the ground when a committee's working?
And look, ideally,
can be different for
indeed, of course. And look, ideally, the manager and the owners corporation itself have a policy. And again, it's not an academic policy; it's a very practical policy as to what's the process.
Yeah.
So, firstly, just having awareness of the normality of conflicts of interest and the different types of conflict of interest, not only pecuniary ones but non-financial conflicts, and then identifying that, and then disclosing it, and then maybe stepping aside. But these things are complex because sometimes, a committee member who has a conflict may have specialist knowledge around the topic. So the committee may still want to know what that person's views are. And that's important.
Might be a conflict that's noted, but they don't need to step out.
Indeed, they may not even need to step outside. Yeah. But even if they do have to step outside, they may still make their contribution so that the committee is doing its due diligence. And this is where all the fiduciary duties sort of, it's a bit like a jigsaw puzzle. They all come together because, what's the hierarchy there? Well, it's important that you do your due diligence. And that committee member may still have really important information or ideas or advice to provide. But it may mean, of course, they're not part of the decision. Yeah. It's common sense. Yes. Really, so long as there is a proper process. That's all. And in a small OC, the risks are always informal or verbal only or unminuted decisions. But in a larger OC, there can be hidden conflicts, of course. There can be, and it can even be subgroups, or God forbid, factions, So you need to sort of think these things through very carefully as to making sure that conflicts are acknowledged, they're addressed, and there's a proper process for that. And there's actually a cultural shift over time that they're not problematic. Yeah. There's no committee without conflicts of one. Yeah. And I don't mean conflicts because of, not being happy with each other. I mean conflicts in terms of, are there conflicts of interest or conflicts of duty which need to be managed?
I think that's the big takeaway, isn't it? It's okay to have conflict of interest. They're always going to happen. Don't be scared of them. Be comfortable with raising them, and if you are proactive around having that policy in place, it's very clear and people are going to be a lot more comfortable. You won't get yourself caught out, perhaps when they do come up and they haven't been
absolutely
mentioned.
And look, I think the main thing for us is really creating awareness around the range of conflicts. And I think that there's probably still a view that conflicts are really, and I know I'm sounding like a broken record here, but they're financial conflicts. And often they're more obvious, but some of the most damaging conflicts are to do with relationships and friendships and enmities and other issues, as well as perception, as distinct from financial conflicts, which need to be managed, can have very serious consequences, obviously, but there are other issues. So even that awareness raising is really important in being the catalyst for a mature process as to how a conflict may be managed.
Yeah. I think it would be great to have a separate conversation, an episode another time where might bring in a lawyer with this experience, or maybe it's Nicole and yourself, to really play around and create some scenarios and dig around in that, because it's not widely understood, and it can be a great conversation to explore that in a bit more detail another time.
Look, I totally agree, and I'd be more than happy to be part of that, Michael. But also around fiduciary duty, it's not only legal, it's cultural. Fiduciary duty is at the core of governance. Mm-hmm. It's about how we work together. Yeah. What's the collaborative culture here? Are we really working together? Because we're not, we may in subtle ways not be performing our fiduciary duty. Yeah. Are we really acting in the best interests of the community? If you have significant differences on a committee, already you're not reflecting the unity of a community. And therefore, your capacity to best meet the interests of all may be compromised. Yeah. But that's a conversation for another time.
And I guess that merges in not often, but perhaps sometimes an owner will get on the committee because they have a certain thing that they want to get done and they're focused on, and they go to the committee with that mindset, but that's not their fiduciary duty. They're there to make decisions in the best interest of the whole community, not just their own personal items. So they get captured there as well. don't they?
Absolutely. And I mentioned that as one of the possible conflicts, where you have a strong commitment to something. But at the same time, we want people who are passionate and
Yes.
prepared to lead things, obviously.
Yeah.
But if it becomes a matter of tunnel vision and that's your sole focus, it may be problematic because you're no longer seeing the bigger picture and the interests of all and the range of issues that matter.
Yeah. Okay, so with these tools in place, though, the foundation really starts with how well committee members understand their roles from the get-go. Many new members might not have a clear grasp of their responsibilities. Many committee members may start without a clear understanding of their responsibilities. So practice 8 is provide orientation and support for committee members. So how can effective orientation set committee members up for success while preventing common governance challenges? I think it's key, isn't it, that introduction for new members is really critical to set them up for success.
Michael, you asked the tough questions. See, I mean, let's be frank about it. Do owners corporations do induction, onboarding, orientation, training, PD well? Well, we can't generalise. I can't provide quantifiable data as to how well that's being done. In my own experience, so this has been experiential, when we've seen it done well, there's manager-led induction. And, it's a short session online or in person that covers the role of the committee and its responsibilities, the key documents, rules, current contracts, the budget, relevant sections of the Owners Corporation Act. As a committee member, you need to be familiar with not the whole Act necessarily. That's, the manager's professional expertise to be familiar with the Act as a whole, but relevant sections at the very least. Ideally, there's practical PD across 5 key areas. Legal duties and governance, financial decision-making, conflict resolution, strategic planning, community engagement. They're the big 5. Do we do that well? Look, I've had some experiences where, half a day's been put aside to be fully briefed about your role as a committee member. It's not common enough, unfortunately. It's also a matter of keeping induction practical or training practical. There are great training sessions that can be organised around owners corporations and effective OCs and committees, but there's nothing like real examples from your own OC. So it's getting that blend right as well, like the extent to which training can be customised.
What we've done that's worked well is, as we know, the AGM, the members elect their committee members and they'll have a first committee meeting, often some months after that. So in between that period, we invite all the new committee members and us as the manager will go as well, and the chairperson or perhaps 2 other existing committee members to just an informal session. We talk about how the committees are run, what our role is as the manager, what the chairperson's role is, what the big issues have been and how the committee generally operates during a meeting. And that really helps that education from existing members to new members. Yeah. So then we're not going into their first meeting a bit nervous and apprehensive, not knowing how it all works. They're warmed up and across sort of the key points.
Well, that's brilliant. That's brilliant. But look, I think that and something we'll talk about later as well, artificial intelligence, ChatGPT, the way training is being reinvented in so many professional settings. It's online forms, and that's been the case for a long time now. We just have to get better and smarter at how we do training. And at the moment, there's a legacy, there's a long shadow from decades ago, dare I say even the 1950s, in how we do training, and we have to meet smarter approaches to it. Yeah.
Practice 9 is understand and support the value of the OC manager. We've touched on it just on a few points, but how can committees make sure they fully leverage the skills of the manager beyond their administrative duties like you've spoken about?
This is another bugbear of mine. And as you know, I value highly the partnership between a committee and a manager and how that's built over time. There are some assumptions here which may be the case of some OCs, and let's unpack them. The manager isn't just an administrator. They're not just doing the budgets in an administrative way, organising the meetings, sending notices out. following up with arrears and so on. That's all part of the bread and butter, the core business of being a manager, but there's a lot more. A capable manager is a pivotal part of an OC's governance and management and its performance. But I still feel that managers can be underused, undervalued, not because they lack skill, but because committees aren't always sure what to expect, how to work well with a manager, and how to assess value beyond paying fees. Like what's the quid pro quo here? You're paying a fee, so in reciprocating, what's the level of service you may expect? Some good practices to get full value include make the manager's report an early agenda item. Ask for a standing report that consolidates, obviously, key operational updates, repairs, contractor issues, insurance renewal. I love seeing a manager's report that also perhaps has some data trends in it, like, our maintenance spending over time, repeat repairs, whatever it might be. And with AI now, there's no excuse. You can feed that data in quite quickly and generate some pretty smart graphics and so on as to what's really happening, and makes it all sense. And then, of course, insights from other OCs. I love a manager's report, or it's maybe verbal, maybe written, maybe both. Insights from other OCs, industry changes, or recent VCAT outcomes. We've had experiences where sometimes an OC has ended up being in a VCAT matter, and if they've been advised by the manager of an earlier VCAT matter, they may not have ended up there because they would have been powerfully informed through the manager's expertise and through their guidance. So that's a crucial thing there, and that reveals the strength of the partnership and the strength of the value out of a manager, having a proper manager's report, as an early agenda item. The other thing we like to see is making space at least once a year to discuss improvements that could be made, what other OCs are doing. Can we learn from another OC that's similar to ours? The manager is a powerful conduit in that regard. Are there value-added services worth considering? I've mentioned about bulk purchasing, community purchasing. Well, some firms may do that well. Electrification, solar bulk buys, whatever it might be. Can the manager assist with this? And if the manager needs to be paid more for it, well, they should be. If it ends up being an important service that saves money for our community or delivers new value for our community. The other thing I always like to see, a manager provides written advice. I'm always wary of verbal advice, and should be. And, is the manager providing clear written advice to committee members on legal requirements or procedural obligation or conflicts of interest? These are things where manager adds a lot of value, as a true professional and as a partner for a committee.
Yeah. We've set up a conflict of interest register as well that sits there consistently. Again, so it's clear historically the conflicts have been raised and any committee members can look at that. And I think as part of that value add, a big focus for us, again, is that strategic planning offering if they want to entertain that, and the community events and activity. That's a big passion about of ours as well. Again, offering that value add to the owners corporation. They want to grow. If they don't, then we can look at other services.
So I strongly agree, strongly endorse that. I mean, that's a great example of what an OC management firm ought to be doing. And as we say, and this is we love cliches as well, of course, Michael, but a good manager keeps the lights on. A great one helps you to light the way forward.
That could be the tagline for the episode, I think.
What do we gain, and where are we underusing the management expertise and skills we've already got, but also what the additional services might be, as you've mentioned, strategic planning, resident engagement, grant sourcing. Some managers are great at securing grants, for an OC. Well, that's expertise, and are we paying enough or expect that kind of support? Are we clear about what's in scope and what's extra? But at the same time, we have to be realistic here because, you can't go to an AGM and say we've got to spend all this extra money on a manager. unless people are convinced that's in the best interest of the OC, and it may actually even save money for the OC and for residents, by paying some money to the manager to secure a new service or a value add.
Yeah.
So we have to be realistic about it as well. But it's an area which is still, to some extent, unexplored terrain.
Practice 10 is conduct a manager review each year and advance the partnership. So what does an effective manager look like, and how can it help strengthen the partnership? What's that review process look like from your experience?
And look, again, depending on the size of the OC, we have to be realistic about this. I mean, some large OCs do a really thorough, systematic review. Many smaller OCs will still, act professionally, of course, but it might be much more of a casual conversation. There may not be necessarily clear criteria for it. But look, at the very least, there needs to be a conversation about what went well this year, and what improvements, were made, where was clear value added, cost savings, improved processes, resident engagement, where's improvement needed, and importantly, are we aligned, presuming we have an action plan or a strategic plan or even an annual work plan, are we aligned on our OC's goals? How's the OC working around those? The other aspect that's important too, that sometimes can be overlooked, with contracts and tenders and the strong partnership with a manager, how that includes shared oversight of service providers. For major contracts, cleaning, gardening, maintenance, insurance, and utilities, the committee should obviously understand the scope, the value, and the duration. I also believe strongly that it's important for committee members, or at least the chairperson, to get to know contractors, so there's a partnership there. The issue here being that nothing should be seen purely and simply as a contractual obligation, whether it's between the OC and the manager, or whether it's between the manager and subcontractors or those providing services like cleaning. And to close the loop there, it's important for at least the chairperson to get to know those people.
A few points out of that. Something that we've done that works really well at our first committee meeting, we move around the table and the committee members talk about, we ask them, what are your expectations of the community? What are your expectations of the manager over the next 12 months? And moving around the table, it's very dynamic and it's a great conversation. Everyone can understand each other and where they're coming from. And then we wrap that up from our perspective, talking about what our expectations are and how it's critical that, members read the documentation that we send out prior to the meeting. There's a lot of work that we put into information papers and decision papers, and if members read those before, and it's a lot more dynamic conversation. It's a great conversation you can hit the ground running into, rather than members reading it when they get to the meeting. It just doesn't work, and that's when you get long meetings, and no one likes long meetings. And what we have done also is we have a chairperson check-in every 3 months, so we don't wait every year and sort of look back. We catch up every 3 months, and there's sort of 12 areas that we work to align with our contract and the value we've promised to provide, and have a conversation around with the chairperson around how things are going and meeting your expectations, and it really helps you, come back online if you need to and address any concerns as they come up, rather than waiting 12 months. And
that's a smart process, Michael, obviously, because, again, it can be an afterthought, or it's something you do on an annual basis rather than how it's prepared for and the manager's role. At the same time, from a committee perspective, a strong committee obviously asks, how can we support and challenge our manager so they help us govern more effectively and achieve more together? So there's always a balance between a supportive partnership relationship, but also how we actually challenge the manager to do things better, or to help us to do things better in terms of our governance and our compliance work.
Okay, we'll move on to practice 11 around an AGM. Hold an AGM that builds legitimacy and momentum, not just meets obligations. We've touched on it a little bit, but how can OCs design AGMs that generate energy, engagement and trust? What are your views around practice 11?
So annual general meetings, I think that they're really important public moments. And can they be tick box exercises? Can they be events where there are emotions endorsed and that's about it? Yes, that's a problem. It's more than a legal requirement, As I said, it's a public moment. Done poorly, it becomes a tick box exercise that undermines participation and also can alienate lot owners. And many lot owners will say, well, look, I'm not an accountant, so why would I come along to the AGM? Because I receive a whole lot of documents and I don't even really understand many of those documents. So what do we change to set the tone for a different kind of AGM? These are simple, practical things. I still see dull, pedestrian cover letters. It's just like it's perfunctory. It's going through the motions. There should be a welcoming cover letter. The letter is your invitation, and it should be co-signed by the manager and the chairperson. And that this is going to be an important event. There will be a report back on the year's progress from the manager and the committee, but also there'll be opportunities to discuss things. Also to acknowledge leadership roles, and not only the roles of committee members, but also highlighting how individual lot owners have taken the lead on particular projects or initiatives. So it's a community event. Again, it's not just the time when the committee is engaging with its lot owners. This is something which belongs to the community. There should be a smart annual report. And again, with AI, there's no excuse now not to have a smart annual report that's well written, that's organised ideally around the goals or the priorities of the owner's corporation, so that it's actually reporting back and where possible with some measurable data, but it's actually generating some excitement, some passion, some enthusiasm for the owner's corporation that this is an annual report we can be proud of, it's consistent with our strategic plan, and this is our progress as a community. Importantly, make space for resident input. Allow time for discussion, not just voting. At our AGMs, we would make sure that in a very efficient way, we would work our way through the motions, but also we would have an opportunity to discuss the goals and the progress measured against them in our annual report. And that this is an opportunity for lot owners to share their suggestions, their ideas, their feedback. Also celebrating community projects and partnerships, the work of working groups or any grants received or working with local council around an issue. These are the kinds of things that ought to be mentioned. So there's a choice here. An AGM can be a somewhat dull, pedestrian event, or it can actually be an event that belongs to the community.
So our approach, we sort of split them into two because AGMs, there is procedure you have to follow and there's things you have to tick off with the Act. So we have an information session a couple of weeks before our AGM. That's a really informal evening where the residents come to meet each other. They can meet the management team and we go through in a conversational way the structure of the community they're brought into, how they operate, what the expectations of an owner is, the legal governing framework they're brought into, what our role is as manager, and there's a lot of questions and debate, and that's a really good forum that there's no structure to. People are really comfortable answering questions that they have, and they get a really good understanding through the hour-long sort of conversation around how it all works. Mm-hmm. And they're a lot more comfortable, and that works well leading into the AGM to sort of separate. We want to have those long discussions. Sometimes it just doesn't fit in with that AGM, so that's something that's worked well for us.
Look, that may be a model that works well, and sometimes you need that sort of division of labour where there's only so much time for the procedural matters and under the Act, what needs to be done at an AGM, what you need to vote on. It gets back though to whether or not an OC has a strategic plan and an annual report, which is the report of the committee and the manager, assessing progress against those goals. And if that's happening, well, of course, there's going to be a space for conversation created at the AGM, and that lot owners will be strongly supported, through good facilitation by the chairperson to contribute their ideas and suggestions and to make their comments, not only about what's happened, a retrospective look, but also what we want to build on in the 12 months ahead prior to the next AGM.
Indeed. Next practice is around chairperson. Leading well as a chairperson, strengthen the role and share the load. So what does good leadership look like for a chairperson? How can this be better supported? You've got extensive experience in that regard.
So we have to be careful here that we don't separate the chairperson from the committee. And sometimes this is an interesting issue. Sometimes even a good relationship between the chairperson and the manager, and the risk is that the committee recedes into the background. At the same time, the other side of it is that the chairperson has an influential role in an owners corporation, and they can set certain standards, set the tone for the work. A good chairperson leads from a whole of community perspective, not just from within the committee room. It's a really important distinction that they should be sufficiently networked in their own community. I don't mean that in a political sense. I mean that professionally, they know enough people in their own community to always bring the community voice into a conversation, and that their chairing reflects that.
You want all the committee members to do that, though, don't you? It's not.
You do, of course. And look, it's something that we expect all committee members to do, but a chairperson leads by example.
Yeah.
And how they also are a crucial bridge in what we call the engagement triangle between the committee, the manager, and lot owners. The manager plays that role as too, and all committee members should play that role. But, committees have new members and more experienced members, and if the chairperson is experienced, they should be sufficiently well networked and working well with the manager, and always knowing that if this motion is being voted on, they can hear the voices of fellow lot owners. Now, all lot owners, all committee members should be able to actually work in that way. But the chairperson actually has a responsibility to lead by example with that, so that we don't have a secret society, and that's not because committees are doing bad things. I'm not suggesting that at all. It just means that there can be a propensity to become inwardly focused. And if the chairperson is sufficiently linked to not only the manager, but also to lot owners, it's assisting the whole committee to perform its fiduciary duty.
Another way that has worked well is for there's committee minutes that they're very formal. Often owners don't end up reading it. It's for the chairperson, perhaps together with the manager, to provide a conversational summary of the committee meeting and to make that available to all the owners.
I love that idea.
That helps that connection.
I love that idea.
With what's going
absolutely.
on.
That's a lovely idea. Absolutely. So you're not just receiving even a summary of it, of the minutes, but a conversation between the manager and the chairperson, and communicating, this is what we discussed the last committee meeting. I love that idea, Michael.
And of course, a key role of the chair is to running an efficient meeting. No one likes meetings that sort of go on forever. So how do you see that role of the chairperson? Pretty important, isn't it, for how they work?
It is. And look, one hopes that a chairperson's had experience in governance or committees outside of the OC, or they've just acquired that experience because they've been a chairperson for a long time, though that becomes problematic too, And I've often been a chairperson beyond my expiry date, and I look back on it and say, well, it's better to be supporting other people in the role. But it does take many years to acquire those skills. How do you not only, and also bearing in mind that the chairperson has two hats. They're the chairperson of the committee, but they're the chairperson of the owners corporation as well. And some of the most important events have been large community meetings. And I think of my own experience, like traffic management, road safety, crime prevention, sustainability, community bulk purchasing around solar panels. And these would be large community events that would be facilitated by the chairperson. That requires, that takes some people out of their comfort zone as to how that's done well, and where it's facilitated in such a way that there's no top-down imposition. It's not the committee imposing its will. Yeah. It's where you're bringing out the best in lot owners as to how they're engaged in a conversation about something that matters. There's another thing that also I'd like to emphasise, the chair-manager relationship. And again, there are some little alarm bells here, because sometimes that can be a very cosy relationship, and that risks undermining the role of the committee. But in terms of time contributions, some of the most important leverage points in an OC are between committee meetings, what the chairperson and the manager do. And, if important documents are being written by the manager, usually as chairperson, I want to see those. And sometimes I amend them and sometimes I rewrite them, but as a partnership in a respectful way, that a lot of work is done through the chairperson and the manager, which makes an OC function very effectively. But that has to be transparent, obviously. That's the first thing. And secondly, it's recognising, though, that a lot of important work is done by those two individuals. So how to ensure that the committee is aware of that, but also how the chairperson and the manager are building a partnership ultimately, and they're personifying that between the manager and the committee and getting extra value from a committee's perspective out of the manager and making sure that high standards are being set. And that includes the quality of documents that are circulated.
It's a critical role and partnership, absolutely. So the last item in governance is around rules. Review and update owners' corporation rules and tailor them if needed. So what's your view around rules? Why is it important for OC rules to evolve over time, and how can this be done in a way that reflects the community's values and context? It's a challenging.
Actually, can I also just make a point about chairperson, another extra point about chairpersons? Another thing that I like to see is sharing leadership and having a co-chair arrangement. I'm always, because even though I've been talking about the importance of relationship between the manager and the chairperson, what often works better is where, under the Act, having an acting chairperson, and this isn't just a backup, it's good governance. I'm wary of any CEO-centric model, where there's a narrow focus on the chairperson as an individual and the manager as an individual. And a way of changing that, or two ways of changing it. One is to have a co-chair arrangement. So every time I've been a chairperson in a large OC, even though it's not the right language under the Act, we always call it a co-chair. So even though I would be the chairperson under the Act and then the other person is the acting chairperson, we just didn't see that as a backup. We would see that as a collaborative leadership arrangement. The other thing also is to have a portfolio-based leadership, certainly in larger OCs where there's a maintenance lead or an engagement lead or whatever. So you're really building the leadership capacity of committee members so that you're moving towards a collaborative governance model. And I don't want to sound like I'm contradicting myself, because before I was talking about the importance of the manager and the chairperson working together, but there are, I'm always uncomfortable being the solitary chair. I always feel it's much better to have a co-chair arrangement with another individual, and sometimes that's a way of also supporting another person who's going to replace you, so it's a way of preparing for succession planning through that role sharing.
That's a great point. So we'll go back to rules. So practice 13, review and update rules and tailor them if need be. So again, why is it important for OC rules to evolve over time, and how can this be done in a way that reflects the values of the community?
So you've touched upon another passion project, Michael. Look, most OCs, and probably it's okay, most OCs, particularly if they're smaller OCs, they're going to default to the model rules. And the model rules actually are a great document, I have to say. There's a lot of potential in the model rules that people aren't always aware of as to how they can be used to serve the best interests of an owners corporation. If you have your own rules, they may become outdated or disconnected from legislation or from your own community expectations. And of course, with Section 138, with an OC making or amending its own rules, it's worth using that power wisely. And we have a rule review checklist. Are our current rules aligned with the latest legislation? And there've been some changes there, of course. Do our rules reflect the current needs, values and priorities of our community? And obvious issues include noise or common property use, sustainability initiatives, and of course, there've been changes in the legislation around sustainability in that regard. And therefore, the big question is, should we move beyond the model rules? This is a question for both smaller and larger OCs. I think more needs to be done. it's getting the balance between top-down and generic and bottom-up and creative and local and what reflects the needs of your own community. It's getting that balance right. And at the moment, I think there's too much top-down generic, and partly because OCs aren't sufficiently networked of each other, just learning from each other as to, there's an OC which has its own rules and they've been signed off by a lawyer as well. Maybe we can rework those or replicate those and they will serve our needs as well. It may still need to be, checked by a lawyer, obviously. I think too many issues happen, including conflicts happen in OCs because the rules lack specificity. Now, at the same time, you have to be careful that you just can't try to prepare for every contingency and possibility, and you end up having very detailed rules that are meaningless. And once you actually have something in the rules and something's not there, it creates its own set of problems. But the best rules, and I think, the rules in my big OC, that was a legacy of the developer. And actually, they were very good rules. And the rules, along the way, perhaps weren't always sufficiently explored, as a framework for our OC's planning and actions. So that's really important. Look, for a small OC, it may be just having some customised rules, and if they're clearly written, they reduce misunderstandings. But for larger OCs, they can benefit obviously from clearer rules around common property use, signage, parking, but also governance. Like if you have a strategic plan and a proper annual report, well, that should be part of your rules. Like this is how we do the business of governance in our OC. And under the relevant section in the Act, in the legislation, it provides you with the capacity to fill in those gaps as to what may be, sophisticated, practical, useful rules for your particular OC.
A great conversation, Nic, to cover off on the first two parts. There's a lot of takeaways there, I know. So that brings us to the end of part one. We've covered a lot of ground again today, from setting strategic direction to understanding the weight of fiduciary duty, and there's a lot of context around that, which is great, and why good governance isn't just about ticking boxes, it's about building trust. So Nic's insight offer a solid foundation for any owners corporation aiming to achieve more intentional, more aligned, and ultimately more effective operation of their owners corporation. So in our next episode, we'll switch gears and explore the more human-centred aspects of committee work, how we engage with our communities and how we build the internal capacity needed to sustain good outcomes. So Nic, thank you for joining us. A great conversation. And we look forward to exploring the other key components of your practical guide for owners corporations.
Thank you, Michael.